It is my esteemed pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Bill Elwood. He coordinates the NIH Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research Opportunity Network, and he's going to share with us not only the National Institute of Health, their research, their funding, and OppNet, but also his insights and his experience as a researcher, as a published author, as a scientist and scholar. I mean, we are so fortunate to have his experience and expertise weigh in here on your first week at the research workshops. So without further ado, thank you so much. And take it away, Dr. Elwood.
Thanks so much, Sandy, and to you all for what you've done to facilitate things long distance and to make me feel so welcome. And I share that welcome with all you participants as well. Mr. Croxford, can you all see my slides? Terrific. That's a little bit more about me, as well as ways you can keep in touch with my office. I'm going to hint at some funding opportunities, provide you a bit of an overview of everything that's going on at NIH, and provide you hints and suggestions that I have learned in my 18 years as an insider of NIH, including some of the things I wish I knew when I had been a private sector researcher applying for funds. So let's get going here with the next slide. We are America's medical research agency. You can read more about the specifics. I'm not acquainted with, while you read the slide, I'll point out that as we are involved in health research as it pertains to illness, well-being, recovery, reduced disability, many researchers access that from a specific perspective. And I'll use an example simply from an institute I was a guest lecturer at the other day. These were people definitely whose interests were in stigma. And I had the question, well, is NIH interested in stigma research? And the answer would be yes, as it relates to health-related outcomes, accessing care, resolution of treatment. So when you think about your research interests, the target populations about which you're concerned, and that drives your work. Think about framing your research questions in terms of the nation's medical research agency. I think it's important to note too that we not only about 80 to 90% of our funds go to researchers at extramural institutions. Some of our funds go to treating people with advanced stages of disease at a research hospital. And we also spend some of the nation's, some of our tax dollars on disseminating research findings through a variety of sources, including the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. There is, I don't remember the name of the sponsor, but there is a medical research library at USF, and some of them are even in the community. 2 points to this slide: multiple portals by which to submit your grant applications. Grants.gov is a centralized location through which to submit applications to an array of federal organizations that fund research. If you are interested in NIH funding opportunities, that first URL underneath NIH grants and fundings is where you'd start looking. And then below that are a variety of agency-specific links where you might begin your searches. These are organizations that we collaborate with, federal organizations we collaborate with on a regular basis. Sometimes we've issued joint funding opportunity announcements, and but we're always working together to see how our portfolios can complement one another, not interfere with one another, and how we all can advance health, well-being, education together. On the right, you'll see the main ways we NIH support research across the career span, beginning with individual fellowships. An F30 is a pre-doctoral fellowship. Different ways to develop the career process from a new graduate through making a career transition to being a senior researcher who wants to learn more. A variety of research mechanism projects, and then when one becomes a senior scientist and wants a larger scale way to train others in that field, those would be the last bullet, the institutional training centers. Let's begin with fellowships. This first graphic on the left shows you how fellowships can occur across the academic career lifespan. You will see them and the mechanism numbers associated with them, F31s, F33s, for example. And you can see the components to a pre-doctoral and postdoctoral fellowship. In addition to fellowships, you'll also see two other names used for them, sometimes concurrently, sometimes all alone. They are called sometimes nurses, the National Research Service Awards, but they're also called the Kirstein Awards for the late Ruth Lillian Kirstein, who was who earned being a NIH legendary force for good at NIH. She was the first female director of an NIH institute. The first director of the National Institute for General Medical Sciences, often was an acting NIH director during vacancies, and most importantly, for her entire life, strove to bring new generations along, particularly new generations of researchers who had been underrepresented until the time that she was working. And it is rare that a federal organization acknowledges someone during their lifetime for that achievement. But because Dr. Kirstein did so much, these were named for her while she was still very active in her career. So at NIH, we have different letters for our mechanism, and I do not know why, but it is somewhat amusing that K corresponds with career development. So all K awards are for career. You can see the URL to learn more about them. They are about edification, getting people from one stage of their careers to another. There are many of them, and I will get to them shortly, but you can see the requirements. It does come after your terminal degree. It You must be holding a full-time appointment when you apply, and you must either have permanent citizenship or residence in the United States. This is a rather thorough list of career development mechanisms. Some of them are, all of the ones that you see listed here are used at least relatively frequently, and for the most part appear from the beginning at the Mentored Research Science Development Award through a more an increasingly older, more developed academic career. Some of them, as you can see, are specific. For example, a K-08 is to mentor a clinical scientist into more research, to provide a bit of both, to help develop a physician researcher. A K-18, it helps mid-career or senior career people to gain expertise in additional areas, to become a better rounded, if you will, interdisciplinary leader for research projects. That's perhaps for someone who's had a first R01 or is trying to increase his or her expertise to lead such projects. The one exception to this chronological order, if you will, is the K99 R00, often affectionately and colloquially called the kangaroo. I'm serious, I did not make that up, David. That is our Pathway to Independence Award, and that's for someone who generally has a K01, and this is to position that emerging scientific leader with funding that can be transported from a career award to a new faculty position, and therefore that can perhaps transfer the remaining years into an R01, because many of you on this call understand that and or have seen that many positions either require or highly desire people with a record of grant funding, and this positions people very nicely in that regard. Now we'll talk about some of the more frequently used mechanisms. Unlike the K, which is at least it sounds alike, but it does not match correctly. The R mechanisms at NIH stand for research. And we're going to go in numerical order. The R03 is the small grant program. As we can't be together, I'm showing you some photographs of NIH. The top there is Building 1, which President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke from when he dedicated the NIH campus in 1940. The bottom is the portal. Bottom photo is the portal to our research hospital. You can see a URL link to learn more. The grant is small for a variety of reasons. You already may have spoken to yourself in the terms of, well, yeah, money. And that's true, but that could be more money than you already have. And if it is also for small projects. So if you are analyzing existing data, perhaps bringing together data sets to make new findings for a larger project, a small feasibility study, these are the kinds of purposes that are appropriate for an R03 mechanism. I need to point out that not all, NIH consists of 27 institutes and centers, 24 of which directly fund and manage research projects. And the institutes do not use the R03 either at all or in consistent ways. We can get to that later, but I thought it important to point out at this time. And R15 is, well, the next makes the next numeric sense, but has something of a different purpose. It is to develop an institution, the faculty, as well as students. The R15 has had different incarnations and has been used in different, in similar, though not ways exactly like this. And you can see, though, that it resonates with the values I've mentioned already: to support meritorious research, to develop a culture and training of research practices among your students, and to strengthen the institutional environment. We have two kinds: for undergraduate focused institutions and for health professional schools. That also resonates a bit with one of NIH's goals, and that is to help develop physician scientists who are interested in that part of their career. The R21 returns a bit more to the R03 type of research project development. It is for exploratory and developmental projects. We call this high risk, high reward. They're to encourage novel ideas. As you can see here, lead to a breakthrough in a particular area, test novel technologies, methodologies. You can see some details there, including this also is used or reviewed differently across the NIH IC members. For some time, and some of you attendees may have heard about this, this was, many PIs used this to simply pilot test an intervention. And while that certainly is possible, that's not the main intent, NIH's main goal for seeing projects in R21s. That means you're certainly welcome to submit them, but we also want to reiterate these other many reasons we created and maintain the R21. The R01 is for large research projects. They are larger because they can last more than a couple of 2 or 3 years. They don't have to, however. Because they are larger, they often build on previous research, perhaps conducted by you, perhaps conducted in a lab in which you're currently involved, or you were involved previously, or one of your colleagues is has been involved. Yes, it usually provides. It's a good idea to have NIH research experience. And you can propose up to 5 years of work. You needn't, however. So perhaps if, I will go backwards to the R21, if you wanted to test a preliminary intervention, and as an R21 is only for 2 years worth of funding, and or an IC isn't interested in R21s, it is honorable, it is appropriate, it is legal to submit, for example, a 3-year R01 to test a preliminary intervention or for another reason. One practice, inside secret I'll give you, is that if you're in the social or behavioral sciences, your colleagues who've been doing this for a while are much less likely to submit competing renewals. That is, if you have a 5-year grant to go for years 6 through 10, even if they only make a slight modification, they will submit a new R01 rather than a continuation. This can lead to gaps in your lab funding. And you should also know that there are publications that demonstrate that competing renewals do better in review than new R01s that based on previous projects. You can learn more at that link. Funding opportunity types. Whoops, sorry. There. The NIH guide, which is that grants.nih.gov link I showed you earlier, NIH guide for grants and extramural projects is a holdover name from when there were hard copies. A notice, an NOT, can refer to all kinds of information. It could tell you about a policy innovation about, for example, changes to the bio sketch you need to submit with grant applications, or an institute is getting ready to issue a funding opportunity, but it's not out yet. All kinds of different notices. 2 steps down from NOSI, which stands for Notice of Special Interest, is program announcement. That program announcement is in a light gray because NIH is strategically fading away program announcements with specific purposes so that there can simply be parent announcements. That little hand icon corresponds to the URL which you can learn more about parent announcements. NOSIs, Notices of Special Interest, are now the way that groups or individual institutes and centers let you know the kinds of applications they'd like to see coming in with through parent announcements that are agency-wide, not institute-specific. Some PAs, though, remain. PARs are a program announcement with a special receipt date, maybe once a year, not part of the tradition, regardless, not typical of the trimesterly cycle that NIH has set up. A PAS is less frequent than the next one, but is a program announcement with set-aside funds. And then finally, an RFA, which is a request for applications with a specific pool of funding that is publicized to the American public. Set-aside funds can be perhaps less specific in that particular regard. Now, let me tell you where I work with some of these nice people in these photos. OppNet is short for the Opportunity Network to promote basic and behavioral social science research projects that individual institutes wouldn't necessarily invite on their own because they don't relate specifically to a disease or a disorder, or they fall across multiple institutes, but not neatly with any particular one. And that's why all parts of NIH participate in analyzing portfolio gaps, looking at the literature that's published in PubMed, which is the portal to all research publications, presentations, books, articles that have been produced using tax dollar money. And even though it's a trans-NIH intellectual endeavor, sets of institutes and centers, perhaps not all, participate in all of OppNet's FOAs. You can see OppNet's URL there, and you might want to follow us also on Twitter and Facebook. This is a timely PAR that OppNet issued. Applications that came in March 17th of this year will go to a peer review session in July. And I'm going to share with you 3 projects that came out of it, so you can see how there's a call, which you can look up here, or if you get these slides, you can click on the funding opportunity. You can see, I'm going to give you 3 projects that scored well and have been funded. Here's the first one. Understanding how social connectedness protects older adults' cognitive health. You could link to this project if you have these slides and click on the title. I don't have to tell you how devastating and prevalent Alzheimer's disease, vascular and other dementias are across this country, and to so many people with whom we're acquainted, perhaps whom we love. It's another national widespread pandemic. In this case, this research team is exploring the hypothesis that social connections and the stimulation and warm regard and biopsychosocial processes that occur when we are engaged with others provides protective factors that can reduce the spread, the progression of Alzheimer's disease, and therefore reduce its burden, so that there could be things we can do now in addition to the prescriptions that are coming down the pipeline. This next one is interesting because it's on yet another widespread problem, and that is autism spectrum disorder. In this one, if you imagine, most of you are familiar with autism. It doesn't necessarily make it easy for them to relate with others and for others to relate to them. And yet it is in the connection with others that we can grow and learn and model our behavior as we move into adulthood. And this is an interesting study because it's a longitudinal study of both young people with autism spectrum disorder and young people who do not have that. And they are matched and followed up to 20 months. And so they're exploring behavioral, cognitive, and neurological levels of analysis to see if they can uncover risk factors as well as protective mechanisms. And if indeed they find them, they then could work on testing ways to bring those into interventions and perhaps best practices to be used in health and wellness care. This last one I'm sharing is on social media. You don't know if you're aware. You know about tweeting probably by now. Been in the news a lot these past 4 or 5 years. But social media use has some deleterious effects, particularly among adolescents who are victimized, who are bullied, who are shamed. And this is a unique study because it is looking at the actual online social messages, the interpersonal interactions via electronic activated recorder, and ecological momentary assessments to ask young people to record how they're feeling at specific, if systematized, moments in time, which then can lead to nuanced, descriptive profiles of how social connectedness, the victimization that can occur during social media use, and teens' well-being has an effect on them, and how we might work with those results in the process. This leads me to a funding opportunity for which many of you likely are eligible. The K-18, a mid-career award for people who may have some NIH funding already, or who may want to become more competitive in securing future NIH funds by expanding their expertise beyond their current training and anything that they've developed along their career paths. It's to gain development outside your area of expertise. David, if you're, I'll give you an example. David, if your voice is on, I can't remember what I was going to ask you. Are most of the people here from Sarasota?
Actually, there are people from all over. About 420 people signed in from USF and about 40 other institutions across the nation.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So I will broaden my example. Within the Sarasota city limits and many other city limits, there are plots of land that had been industrialized. If you're from Sarasota, you might think of the former rail lines that have been repurposed for recreation, although there have been others that have been repurposed for residential use. And so, for example, if you're with Smith Mud or Sarasota, you might recall that there was a Scotty's lumber and industrial supply house east of the governmental core within the Sarasota city limits. And now that is being turned into residential housing. I don't know all the effects. I don't know all the steps that went through that process, but I know that things can happen to the land during the previous incarnations, and that can contribute now to people who live there to the exposome, as we call it at NIH. These people will be living in, I think, deluxe townhouses or luxury apartments, exposed to the car exhaust that goes by on those multiple thoroughfares near them. There also could have been contaminants that sunk into the ground over the course of the perhaps 100 years of the previous industrial uses. And so if I were a child health and human development person or an aging person, I might want to learn more about environmental exposures and the exposome and how different chemicals affect different parts of the human body discretely and interconnectedly. And so I might want to know more about biomedical pathways so I could be better informed, have more refined hypotheses, and submit a much more competitive and sophisticated application once I had learned that with my additional mentoring and education with experts with whom I had not necessarily worked. This next one is for my big data fans. This is a joint funding opportunity between NIH and the National Science Foundation. It has a long title there. Its previous existence was called Smart and Connected Health. Some of you may have heard of that one, but you can see 6 scientific themes, some more related to data science than health issues, and that's appropriate because it's the 2 agencies. I'll say that NSF, the majority of NIH, are participating in this. And what's rather nice for applicants is that NSF, PIs apply using NSF's application package. They get reviewed through NSF with NIH officials in the room, and the projects that have health implications get then sent over to NIH for funding consideration. And those people who are targeted for NSF can go straight forward with them. That was interesting. There are, if you click that, take a photograph of that long link underneath the header, that will lead you to the entire list of NIH institutes and centers. Here are some more. There are program coordination offices, one of which I work in, that can provide you with this broad perspective of NIH. Speaking of environmental health sciences, I'll point out that all institutes have special missions related to their founding, and as they evolve, since so much of Florida and other areas are interested in the environment, I wanted to point out the unique mission of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, NIEHS. Like most institutes, they have an intramural research program. They support researchers like you on this call. They also manage the HHS National Toxicology Program, which finds things like what I've mentioned. But they also have an institutional charter that requires them to disseminate research findings to the communities and also provide worker training to employers and individuals who work with toxic substances or could be exposed to toxic substances in myriad ways. And that might have, since that's very different than many of the NIHICs, and given the audience that Sandy and David described to me, I thought you all might want to know that. You also want to know about our recently unveiled Unite initiative to end structural racism within and without NIH, to help institutions help do that. You can see its goals. You can see a link to related funding opportunities through our Common Fund, which is something that's at the NIH director's discretion. And you can see this upcoming RFA that's due in August, on which the majority of NIH institutes and centers are participating. If you want to learn more about the Unite initiative and extramural applicants like you, there's a link at the bottom of the project. Do I have time to go through a few tips? Okay, thank you. This first one, lower left corner, jumpstart your career with the NIH Early Reviewer Program. The link to join it is at the bottom. You can self-nominate. NIH, you do not have to have NIH funding, and participating as an early career reviewer will provide you an insight to how the peer review process happens. It's a unique perspective you can't get any other way. Specific aims, you've got to write them for your projects. You can read my points better than I. It's important to note that anyone in a study section or review panel, well, there are at least 3 people who collectively have the expertise to judge the scientific and technical merits assigned to an application. They are required to read it, know it relatively thoroughly, and write critiques in that regard. But anyone else, unless they have a conflict with you, have the ability to access and comment on your project. So you want to choose your abbreviations and jargon appropriately, or not at all, because these people are reading your applications after hours on their own time, and they would appreciate it if you could be gentle with them. I also will point out that your abstract and specific aims will make their way, should you be funded, into the general public. Here is an example from a local NIH, a local Sarasota institution, the Ross-Cap Institute. And let's see if it opens. Let me share my reporter. No, it didn't open. So.
We can see reporter.
Oh, you can? Okay, hold on. Let's see. There we go. New share. Okay. Do you see an abstract text?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the abstract and specific aims that you wrote are here available to the American people. I can tell you another way to use reporter in a moment. And if you were to look at, so for example, outcomes or publications, you can see that this research team to date has published 1 journal article from this work. You can learn more about who Dr. Mouzon is working with. You can see the terms under which NIH categorizes this kinds of science. And that's just an example about, Sandy has already mentioned how important your abstracts and specific aims are, but that's how far they can go, from peer reviewers all the way to the general public. Your research strategy is equally important. Here are some people who are working on their research strategies. Mrs. Justice has told me there are some misconceptions or different interpretations of NIH review criteria. So if I have attempted here to clear them up, there's a URL link to read for yourself. But the significance of a research project is its potential, if successful, to contribute to the existing knowledge base and/or health-related practices. The fact that, in contrast, the fact that obesity is an abysmal, horrible, awful American public health problem is indeed significant, but not significant in terms of the 4 review criteria. You can read innovation approach and environment definitions just as well as I can.
Dr. Elwood, could you go back to your slides, please?
You bet, Mr. Croxford. What would you like to know?
We are seeing the reporter. So
Oh, sorry.
slides.
Do you see research strategy now?
Still reporter.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. Do you see environment?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Okay, your sponsored projects office will contribute somewhat to the description of your environment, but things that you and your colleagues might contribute are the intellectual rapport you have with them, levels of community engagement if you are doing that sort of project, longstanding collaborative relationships you may have that have led logically to this point where you are poised for greatness. Other ways you can, early stage investigators are people within 10 years of their terminal training. So reviewers are looking not just at your brilliant, if short, career to date, they're also looking at how you are being supported by older, wiser scholars familiar with their ways to maximize your success. Okay. And though there can be one or a handful of principal investigators, reviewers look at the synergy in a main research. I'm sorry, my automatic timer is kicked in. So reviewers definitely will look at biosketches, they will look at the research plan, and so your ability to convey the synergy among you all to accomplish this unique work with a potential to make a significant impact on the field is really, really important. So is input from a program director who all of us at NIH strongly encourage you contacting in advance of submitting an application, perhaps when you have a 1 or 2 page concept paper that can provide you a lot of feedback. Speaking of these folks, I'm going to go back to, I'm going to pause share. I'm going to share Reporter with you. And no, could you please, okay, the share window was closed. Am I sharing Reporter with you?
Not yet, but this is such a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, super. Time for questions? Is that?
David, do you have questions?
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Dr. Elwood, is there a specific list of grants or funding available to international students?
Not. Could you give me a little more on that, Mr. Croxford?
That was the total of the question. Just for a specific list of grants or funds that might be available to international students.
Not per se. It depends what those international students are looking for. We have a Fogarty International, our Fogarty International Center, one of those ICs, is expressly dedicated to edifying the research infrastructure and personnel of low to middle income countries. So that might be somewhere to look. Also on an international topic, any institution that one has the ability to submit grants through applications through grants.gov, and also is in good standing with the US government can submit grant applications to NIH. There are some applications that, may be restricted and not allow non-US organizations to apply. That's likely a rarity. I do not know, but for example, the RFA I mentioned on structural racism in America, it's possible that only US institutions would be eligible to apply. I could be wrong in that regard, but I hope that gives you an idea of what is and is not available to foreign students and researchers.
Great. And does OppNet support proposals via the R15 mechanism? When this was checked a few years ago by the person who asked this question, they did not.
OppNet is unique in that it only issues, OppNet itself only issues funding opportunities to fill unique gaps in the NIH portfolio. It doesn't have a full spectrum of projects. So follow that link to the R15, and that will lead you to the range of institutes that that accept R15 applications.
Thank you. And what is considered mid-career A18 mechanism?
Someone who might be a later stage assistant professor, an associate professor who perhaps now has tenure and wants to begin a funded research career. Any other? I hope my contact information is now on the screen, and if people have questions about whether or how they qualify as a mid-career person, they're very welcome to contact me.
And could you speak more about the research opportunities available to grad students who have graduated but still want to do research on their own or as a small business?
Yes. It's important to note that with rare exceptions, like the pre-doctoral or postdoctoral fellowships, NIH does not grant funds to individuals. They grant them to institutions and the people who work there. So if you have gone to I have main support mechanisms, and if you have gone to a small business, that penultimate bullet that I've now covered in gray, I believe, small business technology transfer grants, R41s, 42s, 43s, we have a special program for small businesses to submit research-informed projects that lead to health products, etc.
Question, and Dr. Elwood, before we move on with the program. What can you tell us about serving as peer reviewer? Is there a way to do this through NIH?
Yes, sir. I brought up this slide, and the people who asked that question might want to get out their phones and take a picture of this. Link at the foot of this slide, public.csr.nih.gov, and it goes on. That is your invitation to sign up and volunteer to be a reviewer. You do not need, we encourage you to self-nominate. Your chairperson doesn't have to do it. Your professional association has to do it. It's just you for you.
Thank you so much. That's terrific. We have other questions in the chat. The chat will be downloaded. These questions will be addressed either by Sandy or by Dr. Elwood. And then that information will also be published on our Canvas resources page so that all the questions that folks have asked during Dr. Elwood's presentation will be answered. Thank you again, Dr. Elwood.
My pleasure to be with you all. I'm sorry I didn't leave more time for questions, but we'll be happy to follow up in that way we discussed just now and again yesterday.
That is great, really terrific. Thank you, Dr. Elwood.